Welcome back to the workbench for this, the second part of the Airfix Grumman Hellcat in 1/24 scale. So in the last episode I built up the cockpit and got the fuselage assembled. In this video I'm going to be looking at assembling the wings and the gun bays and making this look a little bit more like an aircraft. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minute, and thank you so much for joining me on the workbench again today. Without any further ado, let's get into it. So following on from the previous episode in the series, if you missed out on what I did in that build, make sure you take a look at that part. So moving on with the second part of this series, I'm going to pop a list of the products I used on the screen now to give you an idea of the kind of things you might want to go and get if you fancy replicating my steps here. For some of the basic information about how I'm building this kit, that was covered in the previous episode. To start off with, I need to open up some of the holes in the bottom of the wing components. You do get the option for various armaments, and I decided I actually wanted to include some bombs. So to facilitate this, I opened up the holes as indicated in the instructions. With that done, I started building up the landing gear bays. This pipework was glued into place here, and this was followed by the framework around the outside. There is another brace which goes across this entire assembly, which not only provides structure but detail as well. There are some smaller components which need to be glued in. There is quite a bit of framework in the landing gear bay areas, and this was built up using the parts as supplied in the kit. This large support brace comes in two parts, and this was glued towards the front edge. This will help give strength to the aircraft wings when it's glued onto the fuselage a bit later on. Various parts of the landing gear bays can be glued into their various holes, and generally speaking the fit of the parts is okay, but I do swing back to some of my thoughts I shared in the previous video where the fit is a little bit tight in places, and if you don't get it exactly right it may have a knock-on effect for other parts fitting later on. With these parts done, I can start installing some of the actuators for the flaps which go on the wings. You can either have your flaps raised or lowered. I've decided to go for the lowered option, and the relevant parts are included for that. After this, I moved on to assembling the gun bays. You can have the gun bays displayed in an open configuration or closed. As they're included, I thought it would be nice to display them open, but obviously that means there's more work to do, as I'm sure that if you had them closed you could just omit these parts. The base of the gun bay I've just assembled gets glued onto the lower part of one of the wings. There are various braces and framework which also needs to be glued into place. Once again I had to take care gluing these all in place to ensure that I didn't have any problems with the fit later on. Everything is just a little bit tight. Whilst these wing braces look quite good, and no doubt may look a little bit better on an aircraft with folded wings as you may be able to see more internal areas, in my build they're pretty much going to act as strengthening supports, as they won't be visible. There are some various frameworks and braces that still need to be installed, and they can be assembled in sub-assemblies. Some of them do spill over a little bit into the landing gear bay areas. And having glued those on as appropriate, I glued into place the mounting points for the ailerons, which I will add onto the model at a later date. There are still some more components for the actuators for the landing flaps, and these were glued into place here as well. And it's at this point pretty much these assemblies are ready for some painting. I decided to use this Outlaw Paint RAF Beige Green. This was simply loaded into the airbrush as it's airbrush ready, and then sprayed onto all the internal areas of the landing gear bays. This is the particular shade of colour asked for in the painting instructions. The version I'm going for, as discussed in the previous episode, is a Fleet Air Arm example, and that had this sort of sky colour painted on the lower side of the aircraft. With those areas now appropriately painted, Outlaw Paint Interior Green, which I used for my fuselage internal and cockpit colour in the previous episode, makes a reappearance here. This was airbrushed onto all the internal areas that were not the landing gear bays, so effectively all of the gun bays and those various wing struts which I did previously. Now I'm going to use some Outlaw Yellow. From my research, 2 of the machine gun ammo belt boxes could have this colour applied to them, so that's what I did. For the remaining ammo belt boxes, I decided to paint them with Outlaw Red. A few thin coats was applied until I had the opacity I was looking for. Ammo MiG gunmetal paint was airbrushed onto all of the machine gun components. And then when that was done, I glued together the ammo belt boxes. I thinned down some Tamiya gold leaf with some acrylic thinner, and then I tried my best to very carefully paint the casings of the ammunition contained within these boxes. I would use some black paint to pick out the clips that hold the ammunition belts together, and some gunmetal paint to pick out the tips of the bullets. With that done, the next step was a little fiddly. The machine guns have to be threaded through the framework that I assembled previously, making sure to put the correct gun in the correct position, as they are all slightly different. It is possible to do so, and with that done, this small extra part for the most outboard machine gun was glued into place. The ejector chutes could then be glued into position as well on the sides of the machine gun. Again, a little bit fiddly, but it is possible to get them in the right place. And then with a little care, I installed the ammo belt boxes, making sure that the feeds lined up correctly with the machine guns. There is a clear part for what I believe is a landing light, and that was glued into place inside of one of the wings. There are also some small clear parts which need to go in the tips of the wings, and these were glued into place here. And now I can start to assemble the wings together. Generally speaking, this sort of follows the same kind of deal as the rest of the build. The fit is a little bit tight, but has been designed relatively intelligently, where it sort of clips and slots together. I did find I had to apply quite a bit of pressure though to hold the parts together whilst the glue cured. There are some little bits and pieces which still need to be glued on, such as here by the landing gear bays, and another internal strut which should help join the wings together. This component was quite tight to fit, and I did have to remove some material to make it align correctly. Having already assembled the other side of the wing, I'm just going to show you the process. Effectively, it is relatively simple, where it sort of just slides together, and then you can apply glue to hold it all in place. But it is quite a fiddly step, and it did take a little bit of persuasion to get everything lined up correctly. With that done, I would run glue along the various seams and then apply pressure, holding it in place until this glue dried, to try and avoid any gaps. But once again, it did want to not quite sit as perfectly as I would have liked it. Having installed the wings, there are a few extra bits and pieces that need to be glued into the landing gear bays. I haven't painted these yet, but I will address that later on. It was a simple matter to just load some more of this paint into my airbrush and then cover those areas up. There is another panel which can be glued into place as well on the lower side of the wing. I think this could be positioned open for some reason, and I did find the fit again was a little bit tight, but with some perseverance I could get it in the right place. Now I'm going to use some of this gloss 38 lime and 19 red. These were used to pick out the navigation lights on the respective wingtips of the aircraft. And with that done, I glued the clear parts onto the tips to cover up these lights. and the wings are kind of in a position where I can move on. The fuselage from the previous episode can now be glued into place. Again, this took a little bit of perseverance to get things to align correctly. The fit is just a little bit off and it took a little bit of work to get it to sort of click into place. There are some components which need to be glued onto the lower side of the wing and fuselage assembly, and these appear to be part of the radiator assembly. These were glued together. You can display the radiator vent in an open or closed position. I decided I'd go for mine in the open configuration. And when that was ready, it was glued into place on the bottom of the wing. As you can see, there is a small gap where it meets the fuselage, so things aren't quite aligning as nicely as I had hoped. Before I wrap this episode up, I'm actually going to do a little bit of work on the other surfaces of the aircraft as well. Here I am assembling the elevators. These come in a number of components, but if you're careful with your glue, there is the functionality that these be sort of operational. Once you've glued them together and then you sort of wrap the horizontal tail surface over them, so to speak, you could have your elevators in a drooping position on the ground, or you could glue them in a position as if they were being used to control the aircraft, but they are effectively free to be moved by hand if you'd like to do so. The rudder is assembled in very much the same kind of way, with its mounting part being glued inside the two halves before then being added onto the model. So the tail surfaces could then be glued into their relevant slots, taking a little bit of care and patience to make sure everything got aligned correctly. And I think with that, it brings us to the close of the second part of this series. So I think we're making quite good progress here. We've managed to assemble our cockpit and general fuselage, and also now we've glued together our gun bays and our wings. And that landing gear bay is ready for some landing gear legs a little bit later on as well. Generally, I'm still quite impressed with the overall design of the kit and the level of detail that it represents, but as discussed previously, some of those fits of the various parts are not great. My fears of it being a bit of a snowball kind of thing, if you don't get something in the right place perfectly to start with, it may affect it later on, sort of is happening a little bit now. I've been keeping a track of everything that I do inside of my notebook. This whole section has its own page, and in here I did make reference to the fit and the tolerances are quite tight. I did also make a note that some of the parts are a little bit mislabeled. I can't remember the specifics because I didn't write it as well as I should have done, but F28 and F29 should actually be F36 and 37 at step 141. So it seems like perhaps they've reused the numbers inadvertently, but it was a bit of an oversight, and it did cause me a few headaches and a little bit of confusion when I was trying to figure out what was going on. Part of me wishes that I'd recorded my thoughts at the time, as I can't really remember entirely now what that was in reference to, but it must have been important enough for me to put it in my book. So if you do build this one and you get to step 141, just take a look and check that the parts that you're putting in the right place are the correct parts, because in my case I got confused and it may not have been the right ones. I think I put the right ones in, it's just that they were labelled wrong in the instructions. But you know, when a model kit has over 500 parts and like 200 steps in the instructions, it is possible that small errors creep in at times. But generally the only point that I wrote in my notes here as a suggestion would be to test the fit of the parts as you go through before you glue them, just to make sure everything is fitting correctly. And that's pretty much it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining me in my little adventure on this super scale kit. In the next episode, I'm going to be looking at painting what I've already created and applying the transfers. So make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss part 3. As always, a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. Massive thanks to these guys on screen, and if you'd like to join them, take a look at the links in the description. There are other ways to help support the channel if you'd like to do so, and again, full information is underneath the video. Do let me know what you think of my current build progress, and any other suggestions you may have for content on my channel. But from me here on the workbench today, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me on this one, and I'll see you for part 3. Hellcat Episode 2. Welcome back to the workbench for the second part of the Airfix. I need the box. Where's the box? Here it is. So in the last episode, let's put that down. Put that down over there. I moved on to glue on the mounting points with the for there. Let's check the instructions because I can't remember that bit. Thanks so much.